Thanks everybody for starting to show up. I'm just making sure that you can hear our audio and it sounds okay to you. A few people could say something. Make sure this is working for you. And I think folks are currently muted. So just making sure that if your sound is a challenge, we can problem solve that.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. For those who I have not met yet, my name is Danielle Klinkebell. I'm the Climate Policy Analyst with the City of Eugene. And we're here today because the city is coming to the end of a 6-month-long engagement process on building decarbonization. And I want to thank everyone who's already participated in that engagement, either through a focus group, a community event, an interview, or our survey. Before we get started, we just have a few guidelines for today's listening session. What I plan to do is give a short presentation, and then we'll be opening it up for comments. We're going to drop some guidelines into the chat, and to get in the queue to speak, please raise your hand, and you will have about 2 minutes to speak. Please, during this time, please be respectful, share airtime, and if you prefer to share your thoughts privately, you can fill out our online comment form. What I plan to do now is provide an overview of the overarching themes from our engagement process and the suggested strategies that we see as having potential to move forward. Before I get into the details of that engagement, I want to give a broad overview of the City of Eugene's climate goals. City Council adopted an ordinance to reduce fossil fuel use by 50% relative to 2010 by 2030, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 7.6% annually. These goals are in our city code. City Council has also set a more aspirational goal to decarbonize existing buildings by 2045. So these goals were established so that we could do our share to reduce local emissions, which are contributing to climate change, and to protect our community and our economy from the impacts of climate change. Our climate action plan is helping guide us to achieve these goals, and it has many different areas of focus. Here is some data about where our greenhouse gas emissions come from in Eugene. Transportation is clearly the biggest chunk, and there are many departments and community partners working to make biking, walking, and busing safer and easier, increase access to electric vehicles, and much more. Homes and buildings are the second biggest source of emissions, in total representing about 30% of our community's greenhouse gas emissions. Of that, residential buildings are 11% of carbon emissions, and this helps to, and commercial and industrial buildings represent about 19%. So this helps to explain why the city is so focused on buildings right now. Here is a timeline of actions by the city taken recently that relate to reducing emissions from buildings. So in January of 2023, City Council passed an ordinance restricting fossil fuel infrastructure in new residential construction for a number of reasons, including uncertainty revolving around the Ninth Circuit case on a similar ordinance in Berkeley. City Council rescinded the ordinance last July. Council has passed several motions related to this, and we will be reporting back to City Council on those motions soon. Basically, these motions instruct staff to understand the challenges and opportunities for decarbonizing and to identify potential pathways forward. So on July 10th, we'll be sharing the results of our engagement with business communities and marginalized communities on building decarbonization. And then on July 17th, we'll be sharing the results of our research for fossil fuel reduction strategies in new residential construction. At this time, staff do not intend to bring a policy recommendation to City Council. And regarding the dates, please just stay tuned on the City Council agenda. Sometimes dates shift around. There are many different approaches for decarbonizing different sectors and building types. The idea is there is not one single strategy, but there is a range of strategies out there that can help reduce emissions from buildings. Our engagement helped us understand the challenges and opportunities with each of these approaches. So as for clean energy, we define that as meaning that the building uses energy that emits little to no greenhouse gases. Energy efficiency is one of the main approaches that clearly has broad support. It can include many things, including building shell improvements like weatherization, higher efficiency space and water heating, lighting, and more. In terms of electrification, that means transitioning appliances and equipment to electric wherever possible. So in Eugene, this is a strategy that makes sense because EWEB's electricity is already very clean. So if you're interested in seeing more how we have defined building decarbonization for various building types, there's more information on our website. Our engagement has included focus groups, one-on-one interviews, and surveys with many different stakeholders. And I'd now like to share a little bit more about the different sectors we engaged, what we asked, and what we heard. Just on the FYI that you can access the full meeting summaries of our engagement events on our website. In terms of engaging residents, we prioritized engaging groups we know are at the front lines of being impacted by climate change. So low-income communities, people with disabilities, seniors, communities of color, and youth. We also have an online survey that was intended to capture experiences more broadly across Eugene. Building decarbonization is obviously a big, complicated word. So for these conversations, we started by asking people how they've been impacted by extreme weather as a hook to better understand how the energy features of their home affect their safety and comfort every day. And from there, we were able to ask about some of the biggest concerns with decarbonization and how they might benefit. Here are some of the broad themes of what we heard, and there are a few things I'd just like to highlight. The biggest takeaway is that these communities face a wide range of challenges, including housing quality that compromises health, being highly cost constrained, and being highly vulnerable in their households during extreme weather. Obviously, there's many co-benefits of decarbonization that these communities can benefit from. So improved air quality, improved comfort. But one concern is that these upgrades may lead to unintended consequences like increasing costs. We all know that these communities are also disproportionately burdened by health conditions. So many homes don't have air conditioning. This is becoming a huge health and safety issue. Another health and safety issue is people who are from the disability, who have a disability or another health condition, need reliable energy in case of power outages. There's a clear need to provide immediate relief to lessen vulnerabilities of marginalized communities. So there was a lot of support for expanding access to weatherization kits, portable air conditioners, and strengthening social networks and resilience hubs. The other big phase of our engagement included engaging with the business community. We held focus groups with specific buildings and business sectors. So commercial building tenants and owners, industrial and food manufacturing, housing developers, and public institutions. We also conducted interviews and a focus group with BIPOC-owned businesses. Again, our goal here was to understand their overall challenges and opportunities to decarbonize their buildings for different business sectors. The business community is a critical partner for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So our main goal was to identify where there were points of collaboration that could help us take meaningful steps forward. Some of the biggest concerns we heard in these focus groups was about the reliability of the electric grid during extreme weather, uncertainty about whether the electric grid can handle increased future demand, and a desire for decarbonization to occur through incentives rather than a mandate. Related to costs, focus groups consistently had overwhelming support for expanding incentives and a need for more support in navigating them. There was support for energy efficiency, energy reduction as one of the best, like reducing energy usage as one of the best strategies for decarbonizing commercial and industrial businesses. There's a cautious appetite for exploring and expanding access to clean energy technologies and a lot of emerging technologies. So things like power storage through batteries, solar at all scales, and some interest for hydrogen by some industrial businesses. Businesses specifically want more collaboration and support with exploring and adopting some of these newer technologies. From landlords, they would like more access to the data on energy performance of their rental properties because that could help inform upgrades. So expanding things like home energy auditing, expanding incentives for rentals, and expanding navigational support. Most recently, we've been engaging sustainability and environmental groups. We brought together 20 different local nonprofits a couple weeks ago, and next week we'll be engaging the Sustainability Commission. Among these groups, what we have heard so far is that there is support for increasing education and awareness, for prioritizing frontline communities, and for expanding incentives. But they also stressed and reiterated the need for regulation in addition to incentives. The sentiment echoed in many of these conversations has been one of urgency and what is the cost of doing nothing. We consulted with our energy partners, so the two utilities that provide energy in Eugene being EWEB and Northwest Natural. Both of them are obviously critical partners as we decarbonize, and the reality is that there's uncertainty for both utilities moving forward. State rulemaking for the climate protection program is underway, but it's still uncertain how implementation will go. Northwest Natural currently has an open rate case to adjust their rate structure, and the Public Utility Commission did not acknowledge Northwest Natural's long-term integrated resource plan. EWEB is looking at future investments to increase grid resilience in light of the recent ice storm, and they're also renegotiating their power supply contract with Bonneville Power Administration. So without getting into the weeds here, the takeaway is that power planning for these utilities is extremely complex. And as all of this gets sorted out, it's clear there's uncertainty about what the future energy portfolios of both of these utilities will be, as well as how these systems interdepend on each other. By extension, that complicates what pathways exist locally for us to move forward on in addressing the climate crisis. It's clear we've heard from a wide range of opinions and perspectives on how to move forward, but there seems to be consensus around the following themes. First, there's a need for continued and meaningful engagement with the community, specifically frontline communities and business sectors, on more specific policy and program options. So we've been viewing this engagement process as the beginning of a conversation, but we plan to continue engaging as implementation rolls out. The second theme is that there's broad consensus that decarbonization can provide a number of benefits, but extra effort is needed to make sure those benefits like improved air quality, health, mitigating climate change, reducing costs. Extra effort is needed to make sure those benefits are distributed equally. Third is in regards to preventing unintended consequences of building decarbonization. So those could include exacerbating social and economic inequities, increasing housing and energy costs, impacting workforce and wages, or harming local businesses. So that requires a lot of intentionality. Fourth, we heard across the board support for leading decarbonization with incentives. There's a need to expand awareness about existing programs, a need for more support in navigating them, and a need to identify additional incentive mechanisms. Fifth, across the board, there's a need for education and guidance, as well as more collaboration. And finally, ensuring clean, resilient power is at the foundation of decarbonization, but we need to recognize that these different energy systems and utilities currently depend on each other. So this conversation about our future power mix requires careful planning and intentionality. So these are some of the themes that are guiding us forward as we look to identify tangible strategies and tangible next steps. I'd like to share what some of those next steps could be, and many of these were suggested throughout our engagement process, but still need to be explored further. So the first suite of strategies relates to expanding education and collaboration for the general public. So we launching a large public education campaign that is simple and direct, that explains the what, why, and how of making home energy upgrades that can improve safety and comfort. Expanding awareness about home energy auditing. This is something that can help inform a homeowner about how to prioritize different upgrades. And local programs and a new federal tax credit are making energy auditing more affordable. And then prioritizing rental and low-income housing and older buildings. We know from our engagement that this is some of the least efficient housing. Next, we see the pathway forward with the business community as being through partnership, collaboration, and technical assistance. So we'd like to foster more peer-to-peer and sector-specific opportunities for info sharing of best practices. We'd like to expand technical assistance to businesses. One idea here is that there has been recent state regulations that establish energy benchmarking and building performance standards. If we can provide more help to businesses in navigating these policies, perhaps by establishing cohorts or connecting them with experts to help them comply, that could go a long way towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions in existing buildings. Finally, we learned through much of our engagement that businesses are already doing a lot related to efficiency and clean energy. So doing a better job of telling these stories and recognizing leadership could help showcase to others, the way forward. We know there's a huge need to address some of the immediate vulnerabilities of frontline communities. So as I mentioned earlier, increasing distribution of weatherization kits and portable appliances like air conditioners could help provide some immediate relief during extreme weather. Expanding neighborhood-based resilience hubs was suggested as a way to decentralize what that network of support looks like. There's a great project in Issaquah, Washington that we think could be a good example to look at. And then as we look to make housing more efficient, healthy, and resilient, making sure that we establish backup power mechanisms for vulnerable individuals like people with disabilities, or people who have health concerns. It was pretty clear that the preferred pathway forward for decarbonization is through incentives. So there are already many existing incentives through utility, state, federal entities, but it's clear there needs to be more centralized information and outreach about those. We need to identify any other potential incentive mechanisms. So this could include examining where are there opportunities to leverage existing city processes and programs to incentivize cleaner, more efficient energy usage, for example, through our permitting process, our loan programs, or perhaps setting up bridge financing. The elephant in the room with incentives is, of course, how to pay for them. As a part of the city's revenue committee, multiple avenues are being explored. Obviously, we plan to pursue grants, but another idea that came up multiple times in our engagement was the idea of putting a price on carbon as a way to disincentivize gas usage. And then finally here is that we see a big opportunity in working with vendors and contractors these are the experts who are guiding homeowners and building owners towards certain choices, for equipment and appliances. So working with them to raise awareness about some of the climate impacts of these different systems, as well as what incentives already exist, could be a really good intervention point. And finally, we're interested in launching a few pilot projects to just get some more tangible projects off the ground. So prioritizing fuel switching for homes that still use heating oil and transitioning to heat pumps, exploring a community solar pilot project, and potentially exploring the possibility of a larger scale networked geothermal heating and cooling system. In terms of future energy planning, the city recognizes that this is extremely complex, and the role at this point is to more fully understand the current decisions that are being considered by our local utilities and what gaps may be left once those decisions become more certain. So we're excited to hear today if you have other strategies that we should explore. I look forward to hearing any of those today, or send us an email. We also have the comment form in the chat. And at this point, we'd like to open it up for comments and feedback. We are looking to better understand what are your top priorities of the strategies I shared. Which do you think will best serve the community, and what is still missing? So if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and you'll be placed in the queue. We will unmute you and you will have 2 minutes to speak. And once everyone gets a chance to speak, we can do a second round of comments. So that's about it. Thanks for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and yeah.
So Jim, please go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jim. Thanks.
Hi, I didn't realize I raised my hand. I appreciate what you've done, and I went through the piece yesterday at the farmers market. Currently I do not have any questions right offhand, but I may later. So I'm sorry. I should lower my hand. Sorry. Thank you.
No problem. Really appreciate it. And I see Sonia.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. This is Sonia from Bring. I just wanted to weigh in. Thanks for all of the really valuable information and the feedback there. Not a question so much as a when we go do the next. I just want to make sure that it's out there that Bring has had a business certification program called Rethink for quite some time, and a lot of the incentives and the outreach to businesses and such is work that we have been doing for 14 years. And we've, over the last year, before we even found out you were doing this work, have been applying for grants and been awarded actually DEQ grants for 2 pilot projects around food and beverage manufacturing and the automotive sector to provide incentives specifically to businesses to make change around pollution prevention. And one of those is, one of the pollution pieces that we're preventing is around decarbonization, so around carbon. So anyway, looking forward to more of this. We're on board, and it sounds like kind of we're all moving in the same direction. So thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. That's all great to hear. And we look forward to collaborating with Bring for sure.
Aya, please go ahead.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. I just had a couple points I wanted to bring up. So first of all, I mean, it makes a lot of sense why businesses would gravitate towards incentives. And I just was curious if in those business conversations, the health impacts of methane gas was discussed in detail because I think, there's a time and a place for incentives, but when it comes to health, regulation is really key. We've seen toxic substances be banned or regulated in the past when they've had significant health effects on large swaths of the population. And we know that fumes from methane gas being burned in buildings has disproportionate effects on our BIPOC communities and on youth, being a significant contributor to childhood asthma and stuff like that. Yeah, and then the second point I wanted to make was it feels like, the second work session that we're going to be having this summer is going to be really focused on new buildings. And it feels like this conversation or the engagement process really kind of gravitated towards existing buildings, and I may be wrong about that. But I do think that it's really important to look at the benefits of policy relating to new buildings, because I think one of the big goals there is to stop the city and residents from creating stranded assets that are going to need to be transitioned to electric in the future, and making sure that we're not putting the onus on individuals and businesses, because while incentives are fantastic, they are often inaccessible and hard to navigate, as I'm sure you got similar feedback in the sessions. And so if we can avoid folks having to go through that process of trying to access funds and just have homes be built electric from the get-go, I think there's a huge value in that. So I just wanted to make those 2 points, and also thank you so much for this research and engagement.
Thank you, Aya. I think, yeah, thanks for raising those 2 points, focusing on the health impacts of decarbonization, or the lack of, decarbonization, and what health impacts that could have, as well as the focus on new buildings. Like, that's come up a ton in our engagement, and we're going to continue focusing on that.
I would just add to this. This is Ian Penn from the city of Eugene, that existing buildings and new buildings, part of the reason why some of the engagement that we're discussing today focused largely on existing buildings, but not exclusively, was that was largely what council had directed staff to do, but they do interrelate. And this is a conversation that is ongoing and will continue. So it wasn't done to the exclusion of discussion of new buildings, but there was an explicit focus on existing buildings, largely in response to what staff were doing based on the council's motion.
So other thoughts from folks? I really appreciate everyone showing up today. I don't see any, you can type questions in the Q&A if you want, but I can see Danny just raised hand, so that's great.
Danny, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Yeah. I wasn't necessarily thinking of speaking, but since you're looking for more comments, I'll go ahead. I just had a couple quick points. One was I appreciated you opening with the context of the Climate Recovery Ordinance and the Climate Action Plan 2.0. And I guess when sort of reflecting on the theme of incentives and how that seems to be an area where there's the broadest alignment, I do think the city needs to think, in light of the very ambitious goals it set through the Climate Recovery Ordinance, whether incentives can really get ourselves to those sort of 7.6% annual reductions. I mean, if the building sector is not achieving proportionate reductions, if it's achieving something less than 7.6% reductions annually, that means other sectors need to do more. So, I mean, ideally, as one of the, areas in the city that I think is easiest for the city to affect the emissions trajectory of, we should really be aiming for something above 7.6% to kind of ease the burden on harder to decarbonize sectors. So I think that was just an important, I guess, point to make in reflection on that. Also on the topic of incentives, I didn't see a lot on the potential for the city to work more closely with eWeb to make sure that both the existing incentives out there are being accessed, and the people know that they have access to that information. And, that's not to discount the work you've done in the past there, but also to sort of explore developing sort of complementary incentives or funding streams for those incentives between the city and our publicly owned utility. And then the third point I wanted to make was just on the framing of resilience and the idea of the gas system playing a role in resilience. I think, when it comes to extreme weather events, we need to think about resilience on a community-wide level. And gas is inherently a fairly individualized resilience option. It's not an option that I have as someone who lives in a home that is not connected to gas. And, when extreme weather events hit, I need to be able to have a community-based option for staying warm and things like that. And so it's only ever going to be something that affects a portion of households. And as we know, I forget the exact numbers right now, but it's, give or take 50% of houses in Eugene are already all electric, and the rest do have gas, hookups. But it's never going to be a community-wide option for folks. So I just wanted to make that point as well, that we need to be thinking broader in terms of resilience than just whether or not you happen to have a gas appliance in your home. Thank you very much. I appreciate this additional opportunity for comment.
So we've got two questions in the chat, and Bethany raised her hand.
So to answer Roger Knudsen's question, which are what are the projected timelines for a community solar project and geothermal heating network pilot that were mentioned, these are ideas that have come out of some of these preliminary discussions. I think there's not necessarily a timeline for this. These are ideas that has had some broad interest and support. And I think as we continue to have these conversations, we're trying to figure out kind of what the opportunities would be for doing these things. So these are going to be two sort of important critical conversations that the city continues to have with our energy partners to figure out how this might work, what it might look like, at what scale. Kind of the timeline is something that I don't think we have a good answer for right now. I think the first step is to understand kind of where the interest lies and what is possible, and kind of move from there. Second question from Zach Mulholland. There are still funding gaps to help low-income households transition. When will potential revenue options to close these gaps be made public? I think that's a great question. I think right now, some of the things that have come out of this conversation are also things that have been discussed through the revenue committee. And I think those continue to be explored through that. I think right now we don't have a good answer on the timeline, but I think that's something that's probably going to be further explored through the revenue committee more so than the sustainability program moving forward. But that is something that staff across the city are talking about and focusing on ways in which we understand that there's significant gaps there, and figuring out how to fund some of this is something we are focusing on internally.
I think, Julie, were you inviting me to speak?
I see you.
Hi. Thank you, Julie and Ian and Danielle. Really appreciate the very clear summary. Two things I wanted to piggyback a little on what Danny said. Not only is methane not available to large portions of the community, but I think it's really important in the resilience context to ensure that folks understand that not all gas appliances do function when electricity is out. I can speak to my home specifically in Eugene, which still has a gas furnace. It did not function during the gas storm, and that when hood vents and air filters and others can't work because electricity is out, the use of a gas stove is even more dangerous and has greater health impacts during those kind of events. But more broadly, I just really want to flag the frank insanity of saying we need to double down on methane use when methane is an exceptionally potent greenhouse gas, orders of magnitude worse than carbon dioxide. And so the idea that we need to continue to rely on the use of methane in homes to deal with extreme weather events that are driven by climate change, that are caused by things like fracking natural gas and its use, makes no sense on a broader community scale, national scale, international scale. And I did appreciate your nod to this, Danielle, and I really want to emphasize it that while very appreciative of the process and the thoroughness, there is a real sense of frustration that we are so many years after the adoption of the Climate Recovery Ordinance and Climate Protection Plan and other pieces, that the community has made it very clear that these are priorities, and that we continue to mostly spend our resources talking about it instead of moving more forward with like actual concrete policies, and not just that they be voluntary and incentive based, but that they do need to be regulatory and enforceable as we do experience the ever worsening impacts of the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany, for your comments.
So I see a question in the chat. Thank you for doing the research and the clear summary of where we are. Does the city have ideas and a plan to support community solar? Partner with EWEB on utility-owned solar projects. We encourage the city to invest in solar for public buildings as soon as possible. Important comment. We did hear that pretty significantly and consistently, actually, in our business meetings. So that's interesting. And I think, your question and really comment is about moving forward with that, which I appreciate. Oh, it was a question from Lisa. Okay, thanks.
This is Ian Penn. I would just issue one follow-up on that. So I think there's two tracks here. I think there's the community solar aspect of this, and then I think there is what is the city doing? I think the city continues to explore opportunities to integrate solar into its facilities. We are looking at some projects right now at the Roosevelt Yard, evaluating their feasibility and trying to figure out ways in which we do this. So we continue to look at those opportunities. I think we are in some financial questions. And so the ability to do that is something that we're evaluating. But yes, this is something that we're trying to figure out how to integrate some of these technologies into our own buildings and our own operations.
Mm-hmm. So other thoughts? We've got a lot of people on this call, and it just really, we're curious to hear what you think. And I think it's a long list of priorities that we've come up with. And so the ability to really understand what you feel is most valuable for the community as a whole is what we're looking for.
And we had some more hands. Bethany, was your hand still up, or were you looking for a second comment? Oh.
I think maybe Zach.
Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of some of these priorities, like the community solar project and the oil heat transition, have you looked at the scale of these things in terms of how much emissions can be reduced, or the economics of these? Because it seems like there's not a lot of people using oil heat anymore, so there's probably very limited emission reductions there. And solar tends to be one of the most expensive ways to to try and address reducing emissions relative to weatherization and appliance replacement. So I'm just wondering, what type of economic analyses have you done to prioritize these as the top priorities, and what type of GHG reductions scale that these made it to the top? Thanks.
So I think a lot of these are things that we are continuing to evaluate. I don't think we necessarily have a hard and fast number yet on what the impact would be. I think one of the things that we're looking at right now is how many homes would be affected by this, how many homes in the city are actually on heating oil. This was something that was mentioned in a couple of different groups, and it seemed like a way to roll out some potential pilot projects in a way to make an impact on people who are probably going to be at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. This was a place where you could also possibly do other interventions such as weatherization and other things while you were also doing the technology switch. But in terms of the greenhouse gas impact per project, we had not gotten numbers from that yet. That's something that we're looking at, but don't have a fixed answer on that. Jim, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it was really good to hear that future discussions are going to be with the two utilities, EWEB and Northwest Gas. It's interesting that not in the EWEB IRP is thermal heating and solar. So that would definitely be something that would have to change as far as the long look of resource portfolio for EWEB. That they would have to start digging into that a little bit, and I think it's economically, I think both of those are well suited. There's, from reading your study online and hearing Danielle's report, there's definitely an interest in solar and rooftop and community solar in the area. A big inhibitor to that is EWEB's net metering issue with it does it monthly net metering as opposed to annual net metering, where they would spread the costs out over the whole year as opposed to each month truing up. And also the big one for the businesses and commercial is the limitation on meter sizing at 25 kilowatts where it should be 200. So that's something that has to be brought up to EWEB and find out what the holdup is on getting that implemented. The other big talk is EWEB has been putting in emergency backup water wells throughout the city for emergency use, emergency resilient hubs. And most of them are backed up by diesel generators. Well, if the fuel supply runs out with an earthquake or something like that, I think Howard Elementary is the only one that has a solar backup up here in the River Road area, but that's something that should be discussed and implemented by EWEB for a backup need. And also the solar and storage and microgrids. I mean, they always talk about reliability, and microgrids are basically the wave of the future with new EV cars coming out that are bi-directional and that type of thing. So I hope that all gets put into your discussion with the electrical utility. And thanks for all your work on this. It's very, very impressive, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Kelly, please go ahead.
Hi, yeah, this is Kelly Hale. I am the climate policy analyst over at EWEB, and I just wanted to respond to Jim New's recent comment. I just wanted to let folks know that if they wanted to look at our energy resource study that was part of our integrated resource planning process, it shows that we are looking at all different kinds of energy resources to meet increasing load in the future, including solar, including geothermal, including a number of these things. And our modeling process is designed to look at what the least cost options are for bringing new resources into our community that will meet the load requirements for our community. And so if you look at the integrated resource planning results for the study that was done last year, the modeling exercise actually did not pick solar as a good fit for our community, but it did pick wind and batteries. And so we are going to continue to refine our modeling and continue to look at new data and new information as it comes out about additional sources. And we'll be redoing our modeling exercise for our 2025 integrated resource plan. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we are looking at a wide variety of resources, and we're trying to match the needs of our community and when we need power and what that peak looks like with what available resources are. Thanks.
Danny, please go ahead.
Yeah, I had just a quick point and then a quick question. Yeah, on the solar piece, I mean, I realize this is a City of Eugene session or an eWeb session, but I think maybe this discussion does highlight the need for like some of this planning to be done in like a integrative or collaborative way. But I think, you know, the level of community support for solar is something that wouldn't be factored into a strict cost benefit analysis. I think also some of the community benefits of community owned solar, like the community owned part, and also the potential for solar arrays to be sited on, you know, brownfield industrial development that's being remediated, and to actually make use of those sites in a way that benefits the community probably isn't factored into a conventional cost benefit analysis. And I think thirdly, the changing climate and the fact that, you know, while historically we've been a winter peaking utility, electric utility in the summer, as we saw last year, wildfires and other, you know, heat dome type extreme heat events might sort of shift us to sort of a dual peaking utility over time, you know, more frequently, in which case solar could play a major sort of resiliency benefit there. So that was one point I wasn't intending to make when I initially raised my hand. The question I had was about the proposed geothermal project, and if, you know, obviously it sounds like it's at a very preliminary stage, but if we could just sort of get like a high level overview of what that is, and particularly, are we talking about sort of like a district heating type project? And if so, are we proposing like what I would call like greenfield infrastructure for that, like new heating pipes, or are we proposing using the gas system? Because I've heard groups and utilities in other parts of the country talk about, you know, the potential for the gas system over time to convert to a district heating system, and there being sort of differing views on that. So I think I took up plenty of time there, but yeah, that was the question I had for Ian and Danielle. Thank you.
So on the geothermal project, that is just the kernel of a germ of an idea. It is something that has come up in a couple of places. There's been interest from a couple of different areas. So I think in talking to some of the manufacturers in town, an interest in possibly having some type of steam loop or some sort of, you know, geothermal resource that they could tap into for some of their operations was expressed as an interest. There are some pilot projects that are going on that are network geothermal in other parts of the country that Eugene and other cities are following very carefully. And I think this has come up in some conversations with our energy partners, in particular, looking in conversation with Northwest Natural as something that's an idea to explore, but there isn't a pilot, there's not a location, there's not a scale. It is something that there's interest in. And I think the next phase is to try and figure out like what that means, at what scale, and kind of, you know, with what sort of potential partners on that, but with the idea of, you know, are there opportunities to either do something that would greenfield, or are there opportunities to utilize existing infrastructure in some way and explore sort of that in some more detail.
So other thoughts? Yeah, we're we're listening. We do have about 5 or 10 more minutes because we'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about next steps. Jacob.
Hello, Jacob True here. I was wondering if you'd spoken with the University of Oregon about their efforts towards changing their reliance on fossil fuels and going to a heating system that wasn't, you know, carbon-based. Thank you.
So Ian or Danielle, do you have any thoughts on that?
We have been speaking with U of O and tracking that project pretty closely. They still haven't made a final decision, but a recommendation from the task force has come out that they transition to an electrode boilers instead of the current system that they have. And so we're tracking that closely, and that could influence greatly like what type of demand is placed on our current electric grid if they switch to something that would demand more electricity. And obviously we'd like to see them, we'll just see how that decision unfolds.
And I would just add to that, institutions were one of our focus groups. So we brought folks from the county, from the city, from the university, from LCC, other sort of large institutional entities in Eugene, just to kind of share what they were doing, some of the challenges they've had, some of the opportunities they're looking at, and opportunities to kind of partner and collaborate across institutions and learn from what we've been doing in our various sort of jurisdictions. Aya, go ahead.
Hey, this is Dylan Plummer with the Sierra Club. Sorry, I just logged in through Aya's link, I guess. I just wanted to ask, I'm sorry I did join a little bit late here, so if I'm repeating anything, but I think it's just really critically important, and I know I've mentioned this in some other forums, the issue around disallowing the use of any kind of City of Eugene monies to subsidize the construction of new housing or buildings using fossil fuels. I think it's just kind of bizarre that the city would set a climate action plan and then be actively funding buildings that are going to be standing and using fossil fuels for decades and decades, and flying directly in the face of those plans. And so I'm very interested to see what kind of regulatory approach you all are considering around restricting the use of city subsidies for new buildings that are using fossil fuels.
Thanks, Dylan, for joining, and thanks for sharing that comment. That came up quite a few times in our engagement, and we are certainly planning to look into what opportunities there are within city programs, within city funding mechanisms to sort of incentivize or disincentivize certain choices over others.
Anna, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the presentation information. I just wanted to touch on rental housing because that's clearly been a priority in your study and from various agencies throughout the community, including eWeb. And so for me, I look at that as, the primary issue there being the misalignment between economic cost and benefit for those investments. It's the property owner who makes those investments. It's the tenant that enjoys those benefits in terms of lower utility bills, what have you. And so I think that there's a role for market forces to play there. If there were improved transparency for, rental listings within our community where potential renters could see an all-in cost, like you've got your first, your last, here's your monthly rent, and here's your average monthly utility bill. I think that could kind of help create a shared incentive for property owners to make those investments, with the overall benefit being, reduced carbon emissions through conservation.
Yeah, Anna, I appreciate that collaborative nature, and it's ideas like that we're looking for, that coalescence of multiple areas of support. So thank you for that.
Hey again, this is Dylan again. I also wanted to just flag a kind of spitballing off of that previous speaker's idea. The city of Portland is currently taking comments for a multifamily benchmarking and tenant disclosure policy that would essentially require landlords to provide prospective tenants with information about the energy usage, including the economic impacts, as well as the safety hazards associated with burning fossil fuels in homes and gas stoves and other appliances. And I'm curious if the city of Eugene has reviewed that policy or is considering making a recommendation to council along those lines to, one, get us closer to establishing a building performance standard by setting up ourselves with some benchmarking for large buildings. We could include commercial in that. And then two, to helping to address that kind of split incentive that landlords have by really making tenants more informed about the energy burden associated with units, and in turn incentivizing high efficiency units so that there can be more competitive and taking advantage of those market forces.
Thanks for that question, Dylan. I think answer that in two ways. So one, we're definitely tracking as a city what's going on in Portland, and we've been talking to staff up in Portland about what they're doing. We're also similarly tracking the building performance standard work that's going on at the state level, seeing how that rulemaking unfolds. This is something that came up in some of our conversations with some of our business conversations, as well as some of our disadvantaged community conversations. So that's something we're tracking. We don't have a policy recommendation right now. We're kind of see where some of these other policies land and think about what that might mean for Eugene. I think for the second piece of this, I think the split incentive is really huge. I think not only just for residential, but we've been noticing, particularly in some of our conversations with Black and Hispanic-owned businesses, that they are often renters, and you have the same situation on the commercial side as well. And so that's a really difficult thing. And we've been talking to some folks doing interesting program development in a bunch of different parts of the country, and kind of how they've been trying to figure out ways in which they can kind of crack that nut. And so we are trying to figure out what is being done elsewhere that might also work for Eugene. So yes, that's something that we're focusing on. Information transparency, understanding data is all part of that conversation, and things that we are looking at sort of across the board.
Thanks much. Zach, you just put a question in the chat. I think this will be the last one before we talk briefly about next steps. But you're mentioning minimum, how about minimum of rental efficiency standards, so no one lives in an extremely inefficient home. That as a consideration, Danielle or Ian?
We have been looking at that. We've been tracking similarly what Portland's been doing on that with their HART standards. That came up several times in our engagement. And so, yeah, that's a potential strategy we're looking at moving forward.
Cool. Well, thank you. I just want to give Danielle a few moments to talk about next steps. I think it's valuable to stay involved. We have all of your contact information, and we'll be sharing that when, so I'm going to turn it to Danielle.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. It's been a long engagement process, and this is technically our last engagement event. So thank you for showing up and for sharing your thoughts. And thanks again if you've participated in a previous focus group or community event that we've organized. The one last thing, our survey is still open until next week. I believe it closes June 12th. So please share that widely with your networks if you haven't already taken it. We are wrapping up meeting summaries. So most of them have been posted to our website, but there's still a few that are coming. So our deadline that they'll all be posted by is likely the week before we go to council. And then after this, yeah, we're getting ready to go to council. We're finalizing a report that summarizes, this engagement and next steps. So we're preparing to go to council, and then after that, it's implementation. So we're going to be expanding on the partnerships that have been established through this, building on the conversations we've had to get some of these strategies and ideas off the ground. And many of you on this call are going to be critical for that. So we're excited to work with you and collaborate further. And I don't know if Ian, you have anything else to add, but I'm just, my last just gratitude to all of you for showing up and being a part of this conversation.
I'll just echo what Danielle said, and really appreciate people being involved and being interested in providing feedback and helping us, figure out ways that we can continue to try to, move this path forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Really appreciate it. And if you need anything, where to find us. All right. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.